She had not expected him to walk toward her. That was the plain truth of it, and Mirabelle Gilding had always preferred plain truths to decorated ones. She had been standing at the side table in her father's drawing room, with a jug of pinks in her left hand and a dried hellebore specimen under glass 3 inches from her right. And the Duke of Clarendon had come through the door on boundary fence business, and her father had opened his mouth. And the world had arranged itself into the shape it had always taken. The pretty one is on the left, Your Grace. And then, for the first time in 28 years, the world had not done what it was told. The Duke had said, at conversational volume, "I know," and turned right, and crossed the room, and stopped beside her. Mirabelle had not moved. She had not yet set down the pinks. She was not certain, in those first 3 seconds, whether she was standing in her father's drawing room or somewhere else entirely. Somewhere that had the same wallpaper and the same light through the same west-facing windows, but in which the rules that had governed every room she had ever entered did not appear to apply. The Duke of Clarendon had arrived at the Gilding House that first Tuesday of September on the stated matter of a boundary fence between the Clarendon estate and the Willowmere dower property. That was the truth, as far as it went. But he had also arrived carrying a question that had occupied him since August, when his agricultural secretary had brought him a proof sheet of the October number of the Hortus Monthly, a botanical journal he had been reading for 3 years. And Ambrose had noticed that the marginal corrections on the proof were not in the hand of the editor, Mr. Hollis Trenchard, whose scrawl he knew well. They were in a different hand, precise, unhurried, the kind of hand that had been taught to form letters and had then spent years forming them in the service of something worth saying. He had written to Trenchard. Trenchard had declined to identify the correspondent. Ambrose had carried the question for 6 weeks, and it had not grown lighter. He saw the specimen label the moment he entered the room. It was sitting under a small dome of glass on the side table beside the younger daughter. Hellebore orientalis, the label read, in that same precise and unhurried hand. He did not look at the specimen first. He looked at her. She was 28, perhaps, with ink on her right forefinger that she had not quite removed, and she was holding a jug of pinks with the slightly distracted air of someone whose mind was elsewhere, engaged with something more interesting than a drawing-room Tuesday. She had not looked up when he entered. She looked up only when her father spoke. "The pretty one is on the left, Your Grace." Ambrose answered without turning his head. "I know." He crossed the room. He stopped beside her. He did not look at the specimen label immediately, though he had already seen it and already understood what it meant. He looked at her instead, because she was the fact that required his attention. "Miss Gilding," he said, "forgive me. The label on this specimen is in a hand I have been looking for since August. Are you the correspondent of Mr. Trenchard at the Hortus Monthly?" Mirabelle looked at the specimen label. She looked at him. She set down the jug of pinks on the table beside the glass dome because she needed both hands free, though she had no clear idea what she intended to do with them. "I correspond with Mr. Trenchard, Your Grace," she said. "I did not know my handwriting had traveled." "It traveled as far as my agricultural secretary in August," Ambrose said. "I have been trying to identify the writer for 2 months. Mr. Trenchard refused me. I understand why now." "Your Grace," Mirabelle said, "I would rather you did not. I will not name you, Miss Gilding. Not here, not elsewhere. I came today on offense. I shall leave today on offense." He paused. His gloved hand hovered an inch from the glass dome, not touching it. Her hand was 8 inches away. Still, neither of them moved. "But your aunt keeps a herbarium at Willowmere, I believe," Ambrose said. "May I call on her on Thursday?" "She receives on Thursdays, Your Grace." He bowed, briefly to her, briefly to Honoria across the room, briefly to the Reverend Gilding, who had not moved from his position near the fireplace and whose expression Mirabelle did not look at. Then the Duke of Clarendon left, and the door closed, and the drawing room reassembled itself around his absence. Across the room, Honoria was weeping quietly, with the particular economy of someone who had learned to cry without disturbing the furniture. The Reverend Gilding was staring at the door. Mirabelle picked up the jug of pinks. "Papa," she said, "I shall take these to Aunt Prudence now." She walked to Willowmere in the September afternoon. She did not cry. She did not laugh. She sat in the herbarium for an hour without moving, the jug of pinks on the table, the afternoon light moving across the pressed specimens on the wall. For 3 years, she had been a correspondent. A. Linnet, whose October essay on the cultivation of winter hellebores in Kentish soil had been quoted in 6 county drawing rooms by people who had not the faintest idea they were quoting the late Reverend Gilding's younger daughter. For 90 seconds this afternoon, in her father's drawing room, she had been the correspondent's body. She did not yet know, sitting in the herbarium with the September light going gold, which one she was. He arrived at Willowmere on Thursday at 2 in the afternoon, and Aunt Prudence Anstruther received him in the front hall with the brisk warmth of a woman who had been a widow for 11 years and had long since stopped apologizing for the state of her house. "The herbarium is through here," she said, leading him past the parlor and the small study and through a door that opened into a long, low-ceilinged room with north-facing windows and shelves that ran floor to ceiling on 3 walls. "Your Grace, this is where Mirabelle does her work. I expect you'll want to look at the folios." She introduced him to Mirabelle's working folio without ceremony. A large volume of specimen plates, annotated in that same precise hand, with penciled notes in the margins and occasional corrections in a darker ink that suggested second thoughts taken seriously. Then she left them to it, with the manner of someone who had better things to do and trusted them to behave. Ambrose sat at the herbarium table and opened the folio. He spent the first 20 minutes in silence, turning plates, reading the annotations. Then he asked a question. A specific question about the classification of a specimen on plate 14. A question that had been in his mind since his first reading of the October essay 3 years earlier, when A. Linnet had made an argument about root structure in chalk soil that no one else had made in quite that way. Mirabelle answered it. She answered it fully, standing on the other side of the table, because she had been thinking about that specific plate since she pressed the specimen in 1822, and she had more to say about it than would fit in an essay. Ambrose asked a second question. She answered that one too, and then qualified her answer, and then said something she had not written anywhere. A thought about root depth in the eastern beds that she had not yet worked out to her satisfaction. He leaned forward. "Tell me more about the eastern beds," he said. She forgot, for the next 40 minutes, that he was a duke. She caught herself at the 40-minute mark, when she had walked around the table to show him a specimen, and found herself standing beside him rather than across from him, and she stepped back and remembered. She caught herself again 20 minutes after that, when he said something about the aconites that was almost right, but not quite. And she opened her mouth to correct him, and then did not. And he noticed that she had not. "Miss Gilding," he said, "what were you about to say?" "I was about to say that you have the aconites passage slightly wrong," she said, "but I thought it might be unwelcome." "It is welcome," he said. Please. She told him where he had the Aconite's passage wrong. He listened to the whole of it before he spoke. You are right, he said. I have been reading that passage incorrectly for a year. I am grateful. At the gate, as he was leaving, the September afternoon had gone to early dusk, and the Willowmere garden was full of the particular quiet that comes between birdsong and lamplighting. Miss Gilding? Ambrose said. May I return next Thursday? You may call on my aunt next Thursday, Your Grace, Mirabelle said. He acknowledged the distinction with a slight inclination of his head. Next Thursday, then. That evening, Mirabelle took the correspondence folder from the bottom drawer of the herbarium desk. It was labeled, in her own hand, A. Linnet, Trenchard, 1823 to present, and it contained 3 years of letters, proof corrections, and 4 guineas per essay, paid through a solicitor in Tunbridge Wells whose name was not hers. She held the folder for a long time, sitting at the herbarium desk with the lamp burning and the September dark outside the north window. Then she put it back in the drawer. She did not burn it. The second Thursday came, and the third, and the fourth. Ambrose arrived at 2 and left at 4, and the herbarium table accumulated the evidence of their work. Pencil marks on plates, a folded proof, a note about the eastern beds written in 2 different hands. By the third Thursday, he had begun quoting A. Linnet in Mirabelle's presence. It began in passing on the third visit, when he was discussing the October essay, and said, almost to himself, She has the Aconites exactly right in the December draft, if Trenchard has sent it to you. The argument about chalk drainage. He had not yet looked up to see what her face was doing. He was looking at the plate. Mirabelle said, I believe Trenchard is satisfied with the drainage argument. He looked up then. She had returned her attention to the plate she was correcting. He did not pursue it. By the fourth Thursday, he was quoting at length. He had, apparently, committed significant portions of the October essay to memory, and he produced them in conversation with the ease of a man who has read something so many times that the sentences have become his own. Mirabelle listened to her own sentences in his voice and said nothing. She corrected a plate. She made a note about root depth. She did not correct him. It was on the fourth Thursday that Mrs. Lavinia Gilding arrived at Willowmere, uninvited, at 2:30. Mirabelle heard the knock from the herbarium and recognized the particular authority of it. 3 sharp raps, evenly spaced. The knock of a woman who expected the door to open before she had finished. She came out to the hall and found her father's sister-in-law in the doorway, wearing her second-best visiting dress and the expression she reserved for situations she had already judged. Mirabelle, Mrs. Lavinia Gilding said, I have come to speak with you privately. Aunt Lavinia, Mirabelle said, I have a guest this afternoon. May I call on you Thursday week? I am aware you have a guest, Mrs. Lavinia Gilding said, and lowered her voice to the register she used for serious matters. That is precisely why I have come. Mirabelle, the Duke of Clarendon has now called here 3 weeks in succession. Whatever he has told you, his purpose is, I must tell you that a man of his position does not call on a vicar's unmarried daughter 3 Thursdays in a row without... Without what, Aunt Lavinia? Mirabelle asked. Mrs. Lavinia Gilding drew herself up. Without causing talk, she said. And talk of this kind will not serve you. It will not serve Honoria. It will not serve your father's memory in this parish. I am telling you this as a woman who has your family's interest at heart. Mirabelle looked at her aunt for a moment. The hallway was narrow and slightly cold, and through the closed herbarium door she could hear faintly the sound of a page being turned. "Aunt Lavinia," she said. "The Duke calls on my Aunt Prudence on Thursdays and examines botanical specimens in the herbarium. He has done so 3 times. He is doing so now. I am grateful for your concern, and I will show you out." Mrs. Lavinia Gilding's expression arranged itself into something that would have consequences later. Mirabelle showed her to the door in 20 minutes without raising her voice once. She returned to the herbarium. Ambrose was still at the table, examining a plate. He did not ask. She sat down, picked up her pencil, and said, "The aconites, you were saying." Later that afternoon, when they had moved to a disputed plate that required a second opinion on the classification of a specimen root, Mirabelle handed him her pencil to mark the plate. His fingers closed on the barrel as hers released. Held her fingertips against the pencil for 1 full second, his hand warm and unhurried. She did not withdraw quickly. She released. He marked the plate. When he handed the pencil back, his bare fingers touched the back of her hand deliberately and held for 3 seconds. Neither of them acknowledged it. She continued the identification. He listened. The harvest assembly at Carrington Park was held on the 3rd Saturday of October, and Mirabelle attended with Aunt Prudence and the intention of staying no more than 2 hours. The rooms were full. 40 guests, perhaps? The county's comfortable middle distance of farmers and clergymen and 1 or 2 families of the better sort. And Ambrose moved through them with the ease of a man who had been receiving these same people since he was 31 and had learned their names and their interests and their preferred topics of conversation. He found her at the edge of a circle of 6 guests near the east window, and he stayed. The conversation turned, as it often did in that company, to the latest number of the Hortus Monthly, and someone mentioned the October essay, and someone else said they had read it twice, and Ambrose said with a particular quiet authority he brought to things he cared about, "Let me give you the relevant passage." He quoted it from memory. A full paragraph, her paragraph, the one about the cultivation of winter hellebores in the transition from acid to chalk soil, the one she had revised 4 times before sending it to Trenchard because she could not get the syntax to carry the weight of the argument. He had the syntax exactly right. He had, apparently, memorized it precisely. Mirabelle listened to her own sentence in his voice. She listened to the end of the paragraph. She said very quietly, "Excuse me," and stepped out through the nearest door. She was not laughing. She had expected, in some distant anticipation of this moment, that she might laugh. She did not laugh. She stood at the orchard gate in the October night without a shawl, and she breathed the cold air. And she understood something that had been forming for 6 weeks and had now finished forming. For 3 years, she had wanted exactly this. A serious man, taking her seriously, in public, aloud, quoting her sentences with the confidence of someone who believed in them. She had built her life, with great care and considerable effort, to prevent precisely this from happening. She had built A. Linnet to prevent it. She had built the Tunbridge Wells solicitor and the 4 guineas and the 14 years of useful invisibility to prevent a room full of people from knowing that the sentences belonged to her. Because if the sentences belonged to her, then she was the kind of woman who wrote sentences. And her mother had told her at 14 that she would have to make herself necessary because she would not be chosen. And she had taken that instruction and made something practical out of it. And she had been right to do so. She was not certain, standing at the orchard gate in the October cold, that she had been right. She heard his step on the gravel before she saw him. He had come out without his coat, and he stopped beside her at the gate. "Miss Gilding," he said, You are without a shawl." "I am aware of that," she said. He removed his coat without particular ceremony and settled it around her shoulders, his hands resting briefly at her collarbones through the wool as he adjusted the collar. 4 seconds. He stepped back. "The Aconite's Passage, Miss Gilding," he said. "Have I been wrong about it?" She looked at him. The October night was very clear, and the orchard beyond the gate was dark, and she could still hear the party through the windows behind them. "You have been right, Ambrose," she said. It was the first time she had used his Christian name. She heard herself do it and did not correct it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Wait for the December number. You said that." "I said that," she confirmed. "Wait for the December number." "I shall wait," he said. She walked back to the house in his coat. He remained at the gate. Behind her, through the glass of the east window, she could see the 6 guests still talking, and she thought, 14 years. She had been building the pseudonym for 14 years, and it had given her the 4 guineas and the Tunbridge Wells solicitor and the October essay quoted in 6 county drawing rooms by people who did not know her name. And she had told herself that was what she wanted. She was no longer certain. She was not yet certain of the alternative. But she had begun, from that night, to look at the question with the same attention she gave to a specimen she had not yet classified. In the 9th week, on a Wednesday morning, Mr. Hollis Trenchard called at Clarendon Park. He arrived at 11, having driven from Maidstone, and he was received in Ambrose's study with the comfortable familiarity of a man who had been corresponding with the Duke of Clarendon for 3 years on botanical matters, and considered him a reliable ally in the ongoing project of making English botanical scholarship take itself seriously. "I am glad you are becoming better acquainted with Miss Gilding," Trenchard said, settling into the chair across the desk. "She will be pleased to have a patron of your standing behind the monograph. I imagine she has told you about the March plan." Ambrose looked at him. He said nothing for 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, he understood several things simultaneously. He understood that Trenchard had come here assuming he knew. He understood that Trenchard was about to name someone. He understood with the particular clarity that arrives only when the obvious has been invisible for a long time, that he had spent 2 months identifying the hand on a proof sheet and 8 weeks calling on the woman whose hand it was. And he had not connected them, because he had not permitted himself to imagine that A. Linnet, whose mind he had been reading for 3 years with the private devotion of a man who has found, at last, the kind of intelligence he recognizes, was the younger sister he had walked right to see on a Tuesday afternoon in September. He had not connected them because he had needed them to be separate. The anonymous correspondent was safe to admire. The woman at the side table with a jug of pinks was a woman in a room. And rooms had rules, and the rules had costs, and he had not been willing, until this moment, to understand that he had already paid them. "You are telling me," Ambrose said, "that Miss Mirabelle Gilding of Willowmere is A. Linnet." Trenchard looked at him with the expression of a man who has arrived at a conclusion and found the room already occupied by a different one. "Yes," he said. "I assumed you knew. You have been calling on her these 8 weeks." Ambrose said, "Thank you, Hollis. I think I owe her an apology." Trenchard, with the pragmatism of a man who has been editing botanical essays for 15 years, said, "Send her the October number with your margins. That will do more good than an apology." The following morning the frost was hard on the Michaelmas daisies, and Mirabelle was in the Willowmere garden not pretending to deadhead. Actually deadheading, because the beds needed it, and she had not slept. She heard the gate and looked up. Ambrose was standing at it. He He was carrying the October number of the Hortus Monthly in his left hand. His own copy, the spine bent from 3 months of reading, opened to a plate she had marked with a query to Trenchard in August. "Miss Gilding?" he said. "Your Grace," she said, and straightened and waited. "Trenchard called yesterday," he said. "I have not slept. I have not brought you a confession. I have brought you this." He held the October number across the gate. She came to the gate and took it. She opened it to the marked plate. There was a marginal note in pencil in his hand. "Disagree. See Connie Bear, page 114, cultivation in chalk." She turned to the next marked plate. Another note. She turned to a third, a query she had sent Trenchard in June about root runs in acid soil, a query she had not expected anyone to take seriously. And Ambrose had written, in the margin, "She is right. Trenchard, stop arguing." She looked up at him over the gate. "Ambrose," she said. "Mirabelle," he said. "You have been in correspondence with me for a year through the margins of your own copy," she said. "I have been answering your queries in the margins for a year," he said, "because I did not expect to meet you. I thought you were a Cambridge Don. Read the margins when you have time. Burn the book if you prefer." She looked at the October number in her hands. She looked at him. "I have been in correspondence with you for 8 weeks, she said. Through a side table and a herbarium and a Harvest Assembly quotation I chose not to correct. He said simply, "Yes." "We have both been hiding," she said, "in different forms of the same room." He met her eyes. "Yes." She closed the book. She held it against her chest, not a gesture of sentiment, but of possession, the way one holds a document that is now one's own. "Come in," she said. "Aunt Prudence is making toast. I shall tell her about the 4 guineas first, and the solicitor and the October number with your margins. She will ask for toast first and sherry second. She will have forgiven me by tea." He came through the gate. She was already walking toward the house, the October number held against her working dress. He followed. They did not touch. Aunt Prudence received the information about A. Linnet with the composure of a woman who has spent 64 years learning which surprises are actually surprising. She asked for the toast first. She ate 2 pieces with the deliberateness of someone establishing a foundation. Then she asked for the sherry. Then she said, 4 guineas per essay. "Yes," Mirabelle said. 3 essays a year. Her voice was steady. "Yes." Aunt Prudence held the sherry glass and looked at the October number, which was open on the herbarium table to the plate with the marginal note about root runs in acid soil. She read the marginal note. She read it again. "She is right," she said. "Trenchard, stop arguing." "That is his hand," Mirabelle said. "I know whose hand it is," Prudence said. "I have been watching him look at you for 8 weeks. She paused. "You should have told me, Mirabelle." "Yes," Mirabelle said. "I should have." "Well," Prudence said, "you have told me now." She finished the sherry. "I shall want another glass before tea, and I shall want to read the October essay, and I should like to know what the monograph is called." She had forgiven her by tea, precisely as predicted. Mirabelle wrote to Trenchard that evening, accepting the monograph under her own name, Mirabelle Gilding, Willowmere, Kent. And the letter did not shake in her hand as she wrote it, though she held the pen more tightly than usual. She wrote to Honoria in London, a careful letter that gave the facts plainly and did not apologize for them. She wrote to Lady Paxford, whose husband Gideon was the oldest member of the Kentish Botanical Society and had known her father's Tacitus. Mrs. Lavinia Gilding, in the weeks that followed, conducted her campaign with the efficiency of a woman who had been waiting for an occasion. She visited 3 drawing rooms. She used the word unladylike with the precision of someone who knows it is a weapon. She implied, without quite stating, that the Duke of Clarendon's interest in Mirabelle Gilding was of a nature that could not be called respectable. 2 of the 3 drawing rooms laughed at her. Lady Paxford wrote a note to the hostess of the 3rd, disinviting Mrs. Lavinia Gilding from the season. Mrs. Lavinia Gilding did not call on Mirabelle again. Ambrose drafted the introduction to the monograph. It was precise and careful and slightly too long, and it contained 1 sentence that spoke for Mirabelle in a way she had not authorized. She corrected it. He accepted the correction. He drafted it again. She corrected it twice more. He accepted both corrections without argument, and the 3rd draft was right. A week before the subscription evening, Mirabelle came around the herbarium proof table to where Ambrose was sitting with the March proofs. She did not sit. She placed the October number on the table, open to a plate. She placed her right hand flat on the open page, palm flat on her own sentence. The sentence about chalk drainage, the sentence he had quoted from memory at the harvest assembly. "Ambrose," she said, "I should like you to write the introduction. Not a long one. I shall correct it. You will accept my corrections." He placed his left hand over hers on the page. Palm over the back of her hand, over her sentence. He held it there for 40 seconds without speaking. Then he lifted his hand. "Yes," he said. She lifted hers. She returned to the plate she had been correcting. That evening she wrote to him, at the proof table, by the herbarium lamp. "Ambrose, the monograph goes to Trenchard under my own name in March. I will not be at Tunbridge Wells in December. The county can learn in pieces across the spring. I will not walk into a room of 80 men to receive what I have earned in private for 3 years. Give the introduction you wrote. Give it to the room that is there. I shall be at Willowmere with my aunt, who intends to drink sherry and wait up for you. Come to the herbarium when you return. M.G." The Kentish Botanical Society subscription evening was held on the 1st Thursday of December in the Society's rooms in Tunbridge Wells, and 80 subscribers came in from the cold to hear the patrons speak. Ambrose had reserved the 3rd row chair on the aisle. He had not told anyone for whom he had reserved it. He had simply had the chair placed and the name card removed, because she had declined to occupy it, and the chair was hers regardless. He rose at 7:30. The introduction he had written, the one she had corrected 3 times, was precise. It was careful. It was, in 2 places, unflattering to himself, and he did not soften those places in the delivery. He named 3 sentences of hers he had quoted as his own in the autumn, and he named where he had quoted them: the harvest assembly, the Paxford dinner in October, a letter to the Society's secretary in September that he had written before he knew. He said, "I was quoting Miss Mirabelle Gilding of Willowmere, whose October essay on the cultivation of winter hellebores in Kentish soil has been read in this room under the name A. Linnet for 3 years. The monograph will appear in March under her own name." He did not attempt to speak for her. He said only, "She has asked me to give you 1 passage in her own words." He unfolded the letter. He read the 2 sentences she had marked. 2 sentences on the cultivation of winter hellebores in Kentish soil, written in the voice she used when she was not performing for anyone, which was the voice she used at the herbarium table at 2 in the afternoon when she forgot he was there. He sat down. There was a pause of the kind that precedes either applause or silence. And then Mr. Gideon Paxford, 71, rose from the 2nd row. He was a small man, slightly deaf, with the bearing of someone who had attended these evenings for 40 years and had not yet heard anything that surprised him. He turned to face the room rather than the front, which was his habit when he intended to be heard. "I read your father's Tacitus in 1811, Miss Gilding," he said, to the room she had declined to enter. "You are the better scholar by a margin. I have thought so since March." The room applauded, not wildly. These were botanical subscribers, not a theater. But steadily and for long enough. At the back of the room, Hollis Trenchard raised his glass. He raised it to the empty third-row chair on the aisle, the one with no name card, and he held it there for 3 seconds, and then he drank. The evening ended at 11. Ambrose drove back to Willowmere through frost. He arrived at 12:30. Aunt Prudence opened the door in her dressing gown, gave him sherry, told him Mirabelle was in the herbarium, and went to bed with the efficiency of a woman who had been waiting up for 2 hours and considered her duty discharged. The herbarium lamp was burning. Mirabelle was at the proof table in her working dress. The October number opened before her at a caption she had been correcting. She looked up when he came through the door. "Ambrose," she said. "Mirabelle," he said. "How did they take it?" she asked. He told her about Paxford. He told her about Trenchard's raised glass to the empty chair. He told her about the applause, which had been steady rather than wild, which was the kind she would have wanted if she had been there to want anything. She looked at the lamp for a moment. Then she said, "Read me the introduction. I want to hear it in the room it was written for." He read it to her. He stood at the proof table because there was nowhere else to stand, and he read it at 1 a.m. with the herbarium lamp between them and the December frost on the north window. And she listened to the whole of it without moving. She listened to the places where he had been unflattering to himself. She listened to her own 2 sentences, read in his voice into the room she had chosen to stay in. When he finished, she reached across the folio and took his left hand. She placed it palm flat on the open page. On her own sentence, the chalk drainage sentence, the sentence he had memorized and quoted at the harvest assembly without knowing it was hers. "Thank you, Ambrose," she said. "You gave the room what I wrote. You did not give them me. I am glad I stayed here." "I am glad you stayed here," he said. She turned his hand over. She traced the lifeline once with her thumb, a slow, deliberate line from the base of his palm to the first joint of his forefinger. Then she folded his fingers closed over her own and held them there, her hand inside his, neither of them releasing. The herbarium lamp burned. The frost was on the window. Outside, Willowmere was dark and ordinary, and the December night continued, and they remained at the proof table with her hand inside his, and the monograph's first pages spread open between them. The monograph appeared on the 12th of March under Mirabelle Gilding's name, with an introduction by the Duke of Clarendon that was not long, and that did not speak for her. The first printing sold in 3 weeks. The second printing appeared in May, and Mirabelle had already begun the corrections for the September reprint. Honoria wrote from London in January. A careful letter. The letter of a woman who has realized she did not know her sister and is uncertain how to say so. She wrote, "I did not know you wrote. I should like to read an essay." Mirabelle sent her the March number with 1 sentence on the accompanying card. "Begin with the winter hellebores. The rest follows from there." Their father wrote neither of them. Neither absence was mentioned. Ambrose called at Willowmere twice a week through the winter, and the herbarium table accumulated further evidence, his hand and hers on the same proofs, his pencil answers to her queries, her corrections to his corrections. He did not propose until April. When he did it at the proof table, over the September reprint corrections in the voice he used when he was not performing for anyone. "Mirabelle," he said, "I should like to ask you something that has nothing to do with hellebores." She set down her pencil. She looked at him across the table. He asked. She looked at the September proofs for a moment. Then she said, "Give me until morning." He went home to Clarendon Park. She sat at the herbarium table until the lamp needed refilling, and then refilled it and sat until midnight, not correcting anything. She was not uncertain. She was simply taking the night she had asked for, because she had spent 14 years making decisions quickly in the service of necessity, and she wanted this once, to make a decision slowly in the service of something else. In the morning, she crossed the herbarium to where he was standing at the window, having arrived at 8 because he had not slept either. She put both hands flat on the proof table behind her, bracing. She looked up at him. "Ambrose," she said, "come here." He crossed the 3 feet between them. His hands went to her waist. She did not lift her hands from the table. He bent, and she rose slightly, and the kiss began closed and then opened. And when they parted, her forehead went to his collarbone, and her hands were still gripping the proof table on either side of her, her working position, the position she took when she needed to be steady. "That was the answer," she said into his collarbone. "Yes," he said. "The other answer is yes also," she said. "I know, Mirabelle." She laughed. It was the enthusiasm laugh, the one that arrived without warning when something delighted her genuinely. The laugh she gave to a root structure that confirmed a theory, to a specimen that turned out to be something rarer than expected. It was entirely unguarded, and her hands were still gripping the table, and he was still holding her waist. And the April morning was coming through the north window onto the September proofs. They married in late May at Willowmere Parish Church, her father's old church, at her choice, because it was the church where she had learned her Greek from the verger at 12, and she would not be married anywhere else. 21 guests. Aunt Prudence in the front pew, dry-eyed and upright, wearing her good gray dress and the expression of a woman whose judgment has been confirmed. Honoria in the second pew, who had come down from London and said nothing critical and meant it. Mr. Paxford, Mr. Trenchard, the verger, now 70, who had taught Mirabelle her Greek and who cried without embarrassment and did not apologize for it. Ambrose's father did not attend. The Reverend Gilding did not attend. Neither absence was mentioned by anyone present. Mirabelle wore pale rosé and carried Willowmere hellebores, pressed and rebloomed from Aunt Prudence's garden, because they were the flowers she had been working with when the Duke of Clarendon walked across her father's drawing room and asked her a serious question, and she saw no reason not to carry them. The following October, on a rain-bright morning, the Willowmere herbarium was occupied. Mirabelle had kept it as her working space 3 days a week with her aunt, because Aunt Prudence's argument with the cat about the sherry decanter was the most reliable constant in her life, and she was not prepared to give it up. The monograph's 3rd printing was on the table. Annie sat at Mirabelle's elbow, 11 years old, the daughter of the Willowmere gardener, who had shown up in July asking to see the specimens and had not really left since. Copying a plate with the focused silence of a child who knows she is learning something real, Ambrose was at the window seat with Trenchard's proof of Mirabelle's next essay, reading it with a pencil in his hand and the particular expression he wore when he was about to disagree with something. From the next room came the sound of Aunt Prudence addressing the cat on the subject of the sherry decanter, which the cat had apparently approached again. The October rain was on the mullioned window. The lamp was not yet needed. The morning was still bright enough. Mirabelle looked up from Annie's copying. The girl had the Linnet family handwriting for the genus name, which was something, and the root structure slightly wrong, which was correctable. She looked across the room to where Ambrose sat at the window with Trenchard's proof. And he looked up at the same moment, as he sometimes did, as though the herbarium were a room in which ordinary attention moved in both directions at once. He held her look for 2 seconds. She saw him register that she had looked up. And she saw him decide not to say whatever he had been about to say about Trenchard's proof, because the moment was not for that. Then he returned to the proof, and she returned to Annie's plate, and the morning continued. The rain was on the window. The cat had apparently retreated. Annie was correcting the root structure without being asked, having looked at the specimen again and found her own error, which was exactly how Mirabelle had hoped she would learn. Outside, the Willowmere garden was going to November. The beds properly cut back, the hellebores in their second growth. The October number of the Hortus Monthly was on the side table by the door, still in its wrapper, waiting. There was time. The morning was long, and the lamp was not yet needed, and the work was here, and the room was full.